Well, actually, the Titanic was a cover for a top-secret military operation I was doing when we lost a nuclear submarine called the USS Scorpion. It was carrying nuclear weapons.
After the Titanic fell in the frigid Atlantic Ocean over a century ago, a new mission has disappeared inside the wreck itself, where no one could ever get. Using cutting-edge underwater drones from deep below the ship's shattered hallways, scientists captured eerie and unsettling photographs. They discovered something much more disturbing than corrosion or misplaced objects. The results left unsettling hints that led some to wonder what had really happened that evening. What precisely did the drones do, discovered in the silent, dark core of the Titanic? Come along as we share the details in this video. A brand new, incredibly realistic 3D digital scan of the terrifying discovery within the Titanic. Unprecedented revelations have been made by Titanic. The ship is currently on the ocean floor, has been practically completely rebuilt by professionals for the first time. Now, researchers have an incredible picture of the Titanic's final hours and its appearance as it gradually sank into the frigid North Atlantic Oceans in 1912 as a result of this fresh scan, which was created over a century after the ship went down. The project team claims that every observable element was captured in the digital model, from tiny personal items strewn across the wreck to the ship's magnificent stairway. The 3D imaging method was so sophisticated that even the contours of things and the inscriptions on furniture were readily apparent. The Titanic is located approximately 25 miles, or 12,500 feet, away, below the Atlantic Ocean's surface. The search crew used a custom-made underwater drone that could withstand some of the world's most extreme circumstances to reach this depth. The mission involved the employment of an underwater drone that had never been utilized before. Titanium and other cutting-edge materials that could withstand the intense pressure were used to construct its frame. Of the deep ocean, a tether was used to secure the drone to the research vessel at the surface, offered instantaneous data transport and a steady power source. Because of this link, the group was able to watch the dive in real time and make sure no footage was lost. Because of its superior technology, the drone may fly slowly through confined spaces, hover in one spot, or navigate cautiously. Shoddy marine infrastructure. Time-captured scenes were displayed as soon as the drone entered the vessel. Some sections appeared nearly undamaged, while others had completely collapsed. Bags, seats, and tables remained where travelers had left them prior to the catastrophe. The grand staircase was one of the most amazing sights, which remained where it was, its iron frame covered in bacteria and rust. It served as a startling reminder of how easily catastrophe may arise from beauty. However, throughout the hunt, everyone in the control room was disturbed by the drone's discovery. It was discovered deep within the wreck. Beneath layers of rubble, there appeared to be a sealed gateway. In contrast to the surrounding debris, the doorway's frame seemed remarkably intact, as though something within had been shielded from the devastation. The edges were crisp and well-defined, and thin traces of disturbed silt appeared to emerge from the tiny openings surrounding it. The crew was uncomfortable with the discovery. Some thought it would lead to crew quarters or a storage room. Others, however, secretly questioned whether it was hiding something much more enigmatic. The team produced the choice to keep the wreck closed because of its fragile condition. Rather, they simply indicated its location and continued, choosing to leave whatever was within for the time being. The images captured during the search turned out fresh facts that altered the experts' theories about how the Titanic sank. Even without penetrating the enclosed space, based on previous studies and statements from survivors, the ship's malfunction was anticipated. However, the updated scans revealed that although some of the ships that were meant to be stable had completely crumbled, other sections that were believed to have been destroyed were unharmed. The demise of the Titanic was much more frightening and violent than previously believed, as evidenced by the strange patterns of broken beams and twisted metal. In certain places, heavy objects had been propelled upward, lodging against ceilings as if they had been elevated by sudden water surges or internal explosions. Somewhere else, debris appears to have been swept in specific directions, suggesting that water had rushed through the ship's hallways when it flooded. There is now a lot of research being done on these unexpected patterns because they might identify the exact sequence of events that led to the Titanic's downfall. Every single photograph taken during this journey added to the mystery surrounding what had happened that evening. In April of 1912, not only has this new 3D image vividly recreated history, but also revealed to the world that the Titanic is still narrating its tale in silence, one discovery, one at a time. What unspoken realities exist if the ocean continues to conceal the details of its biggest shipwrecks? Could the Titanic itself come to light after being submerged for over a century? Let's investigate further. The greatest maritime tragedy in history. Unspoken facts. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell was among the 25 engineers on board when the Titanic sank, sacrificed their lives to maintain the ship's power. They remained below deck, working the electrical systems and pumps so that distress signals might continue to be sent until the very end. Their courage enabled hundreds of others to flee, but none of them made it out alive. Later research from the University of Sheffield disclosed that the Titanic's destroying iceberg had actually been established 4 years prior. It originated in Greenland and was produced during exceptionally warm, rainy conditions. The iceberg weighed over 2 million tons and measured about 400 feet in length. The ship's fate was sealed when it struck, tearing open over 100 meters of the hull. The Titanic was constructed to dazzle the world. Only 3 of its 4 enormous funnels were genuine. The 4th was added just for show to give the ship a more powerful and contemporary appearance, but it was entirely phony. This was a popular tactic used at the time to make ships look more sophisticated than they actually were. Despite being referred to as unsinkable, the Titanic only had 20 lifeboats rather than the 64, as advised by specialists. The owners thought that having too many lifeboats would cause clutter, the deck, and obstruct affluent first-class travelers' view. An inspector had even asked for 10 additional lifeboats prior to launch, but the request was turned down so the ship's timetable wouldn't be postponed. Only a few of the more than 1,500 victims' bodies were ever found. Many are still unidentified today. In Halifax, 42 unnamed passengers were interred. Canada, unnamed. Almost a century later, one of the most heartbreaking findings was made when DNA, the body of a baby boy named Sidney Goodwin, who had just been 19, was eventually identified through tests. Months old at the time of his passing. Scientists think that odd nighttime weather conditions of the catastrophe made it much more difficult to spot the iceberg. A phenomenon known as superrefraction produced an optical illusion that caused items to appear farther away than they actually were. The SS Californian, a nearby ship that saw the Titanic's disaster, was likewise perplexed by this same result. Flares, but mistook them for company signals rather than assistance requests. To make the catastrophe worse, Captain Edward canceled a lifeboat practice that was supposed to take place on the day of the accident. Smith. According to some accounts, he preferred to have a church service on Sunday. As a result, many of when the actual catastrophe struck that evening, the crew members were ill-prepared. 1. The musicians on board the ship are one of the most poignant aspects of the narrative. Under the direction of Wallace Hartley, as the ship sank, the 8-person band kept playing music to soothe the passengers. Those who survived subsequently said that either Autumn or Nearer, My God, to Thee was the last song they sang. Only 3. Several musicians' bodies were located, including Hartley's, who was discovered still holding his violin. Instance: the adjacent SS Californian, which had been forced to spend the night due to ice, observed the Titanic's flares but didn't react. Captain Stanley Lord returned after assuming they were merely signal lights, to go to sleep. Subsequent inquiries questioned his choice and claimed that hundreds more may have been spared if his ship had responded. In yet another tragic turn of events, the ship's lookout binoculars were secured, and a sailor by the name of David Blair unintentionally brought the key ashore. Prior to the start of the journey, the lookouts had to rely solely on their eyes because they lacked binoculars. One of them later claimed that they might have seen the iceberg sooner if they had binoculars. Violet Jessup, a woman who survived more than just the Titanic, rose to fame as Miss Unsinkable, but also two further ship tragedies, the Britannic in 1916 and the Olympic in 1911. She went on laboring at sea later, demonstrating her incredible bravery. The Titanic's wreck is still present today, contains secrets. Divers discovered a suit and footwear that may have belonged to a passenger in 2004. Some people think that the wreckage of the ship still contains human remains. Among the casualties, John Jacob Astor, the fourth and wealthiest person on board, was valued at more than $150 million at the $150 million at the time. His young wife survived the disaster, but he perished. Even before the Titanic set sail, it had already claimed the lives of 8 workers. They are still remembered at a memorial in Belfast, reminding everyone that the ship was surrounded by tragedy even before its one and only journey. At the depths of the Atlantic, the Titanic wreck is still silent. Could the truth about what actually transpired that evening finally concealed in its shattered steel and twisted remnants? Let's investigate. The last secrets of the Titanic revolutionized everything we understood. Examining the debris of the Titanic, researchers found something strange. 2,000 feet or so away, the stern, or back part of the ship, was almost completely destroyed, but the bow, or front portion, was still in decent shape. This discovery baffled scientists. Since both pieces of the ship sank concurrently, they ought to have degraded equally. They didn't. But notice that. Experts began to wonder if the Titanic's collision with the iceberg was the only incident that took place with it. They thought that a second incident, such as an undersea explosion or severe pressure, which might have led to the stern's severe disintegration. On the evening of April 14th, when the Titanic hit the iceberg in 1912, it was roughly 700 kilometers from Newfoundland, Canada. About 2,240 individuals were on board. The unsinkable ship sank in only 2.5 hours. The survivors were the only ones who could explain what had occurred. He was able to flee into the icy water. The RMS Carpathia, the rescue vessel, arrived at the location around 1.5 hours later and rescued the survivors. Following the disaster, survivors who claimed that the Titanic struck an iceberg were questioned by authorities. An iceberg close by was later discovered to have red paint markings on it, confirming the veracity of the tale. According to early sources, the 300-foot hole was ripped in the ship's side by an iceberg. However, that idea did not account for how long it took the ship to go down. The Titanic would have sunk in a matter of minutes if the hole had been that big, not hours. Many years later, following multiple unsuccessful attempts, the Titanic wreck was eventually found in 1985. Paul-Henri Nargeolet, an ocean explorer who made more than 30 visits to the location, never discovered any evidence of a large hole. Rather, he discovered a 30-foot crack that was smaller. This fracture was sufficient to allow about 370 gallons of water to enter every second. The ship would fill up at that rate and sink in roughly 2.5 hours, according to survivors. This finding demonstrated that the Titanic had a smaller, more lethal tear rather than a massive one. This peculiar discovery made many question whether the disaster was caused by human error or even a covert act. A few started to believe that possibly the most well-known shipwreck in history wasn't caused by the iceberg alone, merely an accident, but a component of a more profound artificial enigma. But there was still another riddle. Why did the stern sustain more damage than the bow? Researchers employed sophisticated sonar and undersea drones to take thousands of pictures and build a complete three-dimensional model of the ship. The model showed that, as though the steel ship were made of paper, the decks in the stern had collapsed into one another. But the bow's shape allowed it to easily cut through the water, keeping it mostly undamaged. The 3D model also showed how the stern hit the ocean floor. It spun counterclockwise and struck the seabed at a speed of around 80 kilometers per hour. The force of the collision and the water pressure completely tore apart the stern. For a long time, the Titanic was believed to have split in two before sinking. However, the 3D scans revealed that the ship most likely broke apart after it was submerged. This implied that the stern had split before landing 2,000 feet from the bow after sinking and rotating. The Titanic lies today, quietly rotting away at the ocean's bottom. If the silence of the Titanic continues to guard untold tales, the reason why generations of explorers risked everything to locate her. And when they did, what realities did they discover? Watch this space for more. The unrelenting search. For the Titanic following the RMS Titanic's early, the world was devastated in the early hours of April 15, 1912. Everyone was startled by the catastrophe, and many continued to wonder where the renowned ship was for years following. Had vanished. It would take more than 70 years before anyone found it, despite the fact that many desired to. Early on, following the sinking, a number of teams attempted to find the Titanic using the during the disaster SOS coordinates were sent. These aided rescue vessels in getting to survivors. However, their accuracy was insufficient to locate the wreck. The ship had descended into deep, frigid water that was inaccessible to divers, some 4,000 meters below the surface. Only early diving equipment operated at a distance of roughly 90 meters, making the Titanic well out of reach. People were still fixated. Strange ideas were developed by explorers and inventors to lift the ship. Some desired to employ magnets. Others imagined that they could make the hull float by pumping ping-pong balls into it. One even proposed to lift it, freeze it in an iceberg. These concepts all failed, but they demonstrated how profoundly the world desired to restore what had been lost. By the 1950s, technology had sufficiently developed to try again. A man by the name of Risdon Beasley attempted to use tiny dynamite charges in 1953 to send waves of sound on the ocean floor. He thought that sonar might map the region and reveal the ship's location. However, the equipment was inadequate and the ocean was too deep. The quest was unsuccessful once more. Then came Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution scientist Robert Ballard. 1977 saw him make his first significant effort to locate the Titanic using a drill ship equipped with sonar and cameras. Unfortunately, he lost equipment valued at $600,000 to the sea when the drill pipe broke. The vessel stayed concealed. Millionaire Jack Grimm of Texas made the decision to try his luck in 1980. Grimm was well known for extremely bizarre quests for Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and Noah's Ark. He poured $330,000 USD for sonar equipment and employed Columbia University scientists. Grimm even claimed to have a monkey named Titan that could locate the ship on a map. He was forced to abandon it by scientists. Grimm's vessels examined hundreds of miles of ocean floor using magnetic and sonar instruments. At one point, they believed they saw something resembling a propeller. However, the operation was hampered by severe weather. Later attempts in 1983 were unsuccessful. Nevertheless, Grimm's efforts were beneficial. Future searches by thoroughly mapping the ocean floor. In 1985, Robert Ballard finally came back. He collaborated covertly with the U.S. this time. Navy, using the mission as a pretext for testing novel deep-sea robots. He created Argo, a unique camera sled that was capable of diving deeper than 6,000 meters and returning real-time images. Ballard collaborated with Jean-Louis Michel, a French explorer, looked for debris strewn across the seafloor rather than the ship itself. On September 1st, his team eventually noticed a Titanic boiler on the webcam feed in 1985. The following day, they discovered the bow and stern, demonstrating that the ship had split in two prior to sinking. Following 73 years of enigma, the Titanic was eventually located. Ballard utilized a robot when he returned the next year in a small submarine called Alvin, asked Jason Jr. to investigate the wreck. They recorded hours of video and thousands of pictures, displaying eerie pictures of what used to be the biggest ship in the world. From 1993 to 1998, over 4,000 objects, including jewelry, were recovered from the site under the direction of RMS Titanic Inker Furniture and China. A large section of the hull broke free and sank once more in 1996. However, it was eventually raised in 1998 by another mission. It is currently housed in a Las Vegas museum. Not all were content. Many claimed that the location ought to be handled more like a cemetery than a museum. Others disagreed that the Titanic belonged to history, not to any individual. Exactly 100 years after the disaster, in 2012, the Titanic is officially protected as a cultural heritage site by UNESCO, which means it should remain in harmony. Nevertheless, new explorers continue to return. Some employ AI mapping and 3D scanners to investigate how the ship is gradually disintegrating. Then, disaster struck once more in 2023 when the Ocean Gate Titan, all 5 people on board, perished when the submersible imploded during a dive to the wreck. It brought to mind the universe in which the Titanic story takes place is not only about loss, but also about the peril of human pride and the never-ending desire to discover what is out of reach. Despite all these years, deep below the Black Ocean, the Titanic remains silent, shattered, and unforgettable. What are your thoughts concerning the discoveries made within the Titanic? Post your opinions in the space provided for comments below. We appreciate you seeing this film and hope you enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe and like. Select the next video that appears on your Watch Your Favorite Celebrity Tales on the screen. I'll see you there.